right. Hey, everybody. You are live on Shally's Alley, the show that puts out the fires caused by your burning questions. You like that one, Bob? My guest today is Bob Pulver, a former IBI, yeah, a former IBM think tank person and expert in AIIQ, which is AIQ. I invited Bob today to talk a little bit about responsible AI in TA and in human resources. Bob actually has a show, a podcast here in the Work Defined network, or I don't know, is it network distribution? What is Work
Yeah,
Defined?
yeah.
How do I explain that? Network, right?
Well,
I guess
officially, I call it the podcast network, but I like to think of it as our own little
syndicate,
community.
the
Yeah, sure,
syndicate,
sure. Let's go with that.
the Kaiban or
Right.
anyway. So if you go to head over to Work Defined, you'll see a list of podcasters. I've recently been picked up by them, and I'm being distributed there as well. And Bob has a long established show there, all about elevating your IQ for AI. So AI IQ, anyway, and that's how we ended up connecting him to the show today. Um, Bob, you've you've positioned yourself at the intersection of responsible AI and human resources. But as I go out there and I travel, and I know you recently went to the Transform conference, which I want to ask you about as well. I've noticed that AI is increasing in use in recruitment, but it's also starting to raise alarm bells around algorithmic bias, something a lot of folks probably aren't aware of, intersectional bias. Can you share a scenario from any of your audits, you know, privacy, names removed or whatever, a scenario from any one of your audits or advisory experiences where AI driven recruitment significantly disadvantaged a specific group through some sort of intersectional bias or something like that? Can you give us an example of something that you encountered that you've obviously not naming any clients, but the
Yeah.
situation or the conditions?
Well, I will tell you, first of all, Shally, thank you for having me. And your whole opening there, this is something I need to strive for. I gotta up my game in my own show because I love the opening sequence there. Um, the I guess some of the things that I've seen or where people are more um, they're not thinking deeply enough about
Mhm.
what this even means.
Right. They just
And
push the button, like, this is cool, let's do it. And they push the button.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we gotta do AI. We gotta do AI. Everyone's doing AI, right? We're never gonna get through all these applications, so we gotta, sort of offload some of that. But so a lot of it goes back to like you were talking about this AIQ concept, which I think about as AI literacy and readiness. And so there's a lot that goes into that, and some of it is, as you were alluding to, the principles around how do we be as responsible and fair as we can as we deploy AI, as we build AI. So we've got to put more pressure on the vendors in this space, which I just saw quite a few of those at Transform. But holding them accountable to be more sort of trusted, right? Is a whole nother set of questions that we can
Right.
start to ask of these vendors. But in terms of responsible use throughout the talent lifecycle, so TA and beyond, as we think about pay equity, as we think about promotion opportunities, even learning and development opportunities, are part of someone's career potential and livelihood and compensation, all these things. As far as the EU AI Act, they would say that these are high risk situations, and so we just need to be very
Okay.
thoughtful about how we um, trust these vendors, how we understand what data we're using to train these systems, because the output, if you mentioned algorithmic bias, if there's bias in the
In the training
output of
data.
yeah, then obviously it's going to learn from that. It doesn't necessarily know
That it
what's
doesn't know what bias
biased
is.
and
It
what's
just knows,
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Isn't it true that the way that these, AI systems are trained, they just have a natural tendency towards dominant categories. So when something is dominant, when something repeats, the themes that repeat the most often, it sort of takes that, almost like the popularity is the truth, like the popular content is the true content, even if it's not necessarily the best content. Is it true that AI basically has a built-in bias towards dominant classifications?
Well, I would say in large part that's a fair observation, but I would also say that, if we think about our historical decisions, human driven decisions, it's a result of that historical bias, right? So even if you get a solution that has been effectively trained and it's been audited, to make
Hmm.
sure that the adverse impact is mitigated, um, once you add other new data sets that maybe haven't been sort of
Oh,
cleansed, and there's bias in that
got it.
data, now it's going to be trained as it goes through reinforcement learning and other types of training with new data, right? All these LLM based tools and all these AI tools are continuously absorbing and ingesting new information, right? So if there's bias in that new data, so let's say you trust a new vendor, a new ATS, maybe they've gone through an independent bias audit, and you take it in, and now you say, oh, what would be even better is if we took some of our historical performance management data,
And that might
who,
be
who
right. Okay.
yeah, then all of a sudden it starts to pick up these new patterns. It starts to think, maybe I should be prioritizing, white men over some,
But see, that's
certain
exactly
identity.
my
Yeah,
question, right? It's like if you were to ask an AI today, the way the generative AI is right now, if you were to ask the AI what is the best flavor of cookie, or what is the best cookie, it's going to give you an answer based on all of the data that it has and which flavor of cookie or which type of cookie is the most talked about, the most written about, the most popular one. So it'll say, chocolate chip. But it is ignoring, for example, in trying to bring this back to recruiting, it's ignoring cultural bias, right? Like
yeah,
if you were to ask an AI that was raised on an Italian culture, then the favorite cookie there might be the wedding cookie, or you know what I'm saying. So like,
yeah.
isn't it true that basically we are essentially training them to recognize the majority, which no matter what you do is always going to negatively impact the minority. So it's going to say chocolate chip and ignore snickerdoodles or whatever.
Well, I think part of this, as you think about what what's the objective of using the tool, what new
Right.
insight can I derive? You've got to understand what are the right parameters. So, Shall this when you're creating a Boolean string to go do
Hmm.
outbound sourcing, you've got to increase its own the tool's intelligence by saying, look, I'm looking for this. I'm looking for this person. So you're not looking for, the best tasting cookie. That's which is subjective into itself, right? I'm looking for
Right.
a cookie that's got this texture and this, whatever low. Maybe it's gluten free. Maybe it's whatever, right? So the more specific you can get in training it for exactly what you look for, then it can sort of adjust its weights for those different
Okay.
attributes of the cookie or the
So what
candidate.
you're saying
And
is
so
that we can essentially educate, that we can counterbalance that proclivity towards dominant traits by specifically saying, we don't want to pick out dominant traits. We want to pick out these traits.
yeah, I mean, if you were let's say if you were having people over over for dessert and you needed
Hmm.
to get more than one type of cookie, you'd want to know what people's preferences are, what their allergies
Right.
are, what their things like that. So you've got to get pretty specific, which is why even if you're using AI to like create a job description, you want to look it over and not completely trust it.
Right.
You want to
Right.
look it over and say, okay, what about this? What about that? Or maybe that should be in the must-have category as opposed to the nice to have bulleted section and things like that. So we've got to just be careful about injecting our own biases as we calibrate some of these tools ourselves, right? As you know, some of these sourcing tools or ATS tools, you say, show me more candidates like this, less like this, or whatever.
Hmm.
But
Right.
it would be more helpful to say exactly why, right? So a lot of times I see these tools where they might say um, yes, maybe no, and then give me a reason for the no. But I don't see a lot saying, why did you say yes? Or why is this a maybe? What's preventing it from being a yes or a
Mm.
no? right?
Okay.
So that level of fine tuning and calibration, I think, can go a long way. But you've got to recognize that historical data um, is riddled with bias because humans are biased entities and they make biased decisions, whether we realize it or accept that or not. We've got subconscious and unconscious biases.
Right,
We
right,
all
right.
have
And
dozens
I
of
also don't
all
want to. I
data
don't want to
sets.
throw bias. Yeah, right. I understand that we have right.
Yeah,
So there's historical bias. There's bias that we literally train the tool with. So the data may not be biased, but we are, etc. And I also do want to clarify that I'm not trying to throw bias under the bus here. I mean, we do need bias. Bias is an important part of human existence in that it helps us recognize patterns. Some patterns may be unhealthy for us, so it helps us avoid dangerous situations. Like, for example, if you're a driver of a car and you have a bias towards um, angularly moving objects, it's going to save your life because you're going to avoid a car accident, right? So the bias
yeah,
is necessary. It's just being aware of the bias, and that's kind of what I'm getting to. Have you seen? Can you point to a, a scenario from your investigations or audits or experiences where there's been an unintentional, like, give us an example of an unintentional outcome that disadvantaged a particular group, whatever group, because of the implementation. I'm not looking for like a person to blame or anything, just a
yeah, yeah.
scenario of like what could go wrong. Give me an example of what could go wrong.
Yeah, well, I think there's the protected categories that we all know that have been protected from, just basic civil rights, legislation going back, 50, 60 years. There's newer biases where, you could check for age discrimination. You could check for disability discrimination. So, um, just speaking in generalities, I would say a lot of it um, is, can we definitively determine that um, not I think to your point, there's the um, there's the attributes themselves, right? Like this person is Asian American, African American, and then there's obviously gender, and then there's the intersection of those things. So, African American, females were at a significant disadvantage for this type of role. So we see that. Um, these are some of the ones that certainly make headlines, right? Where we're only hiring, male engineers, or we're only hiring,
Right, because
white
they're
people.
so obvious. But that's I mean the intersectional bias um, is I think is partly where the really big risk is in
Yeah,
that unknown. Because we know that we have a propensity for bias in gender and race, and we're looking for that,
yeah.
but we're not looking for the unintentional intersectional bias, which I'm happy to explain. Have you encountered a deployment where um, the, nobody expected to find this kind of bias and they found it?
Um, I haven't, but to be fair, I mean, I haven't done. I learned how to be an auditor, and I got certified to do audits, but that's not really what I do. I'm more consulting and advising um, companies on the both the vendor side and the buy side, so TA
Got it.
teams, on
So
what
you
are the
haven't
things
seen
to
the
be done.
train wreck, but you know how to prevent it.
I haven't seen the train wreck, but based on my relationships, not just with vendors who have gone through audits, but with some of the auditing firms. So I have relationships with a couple of the AI governance, AI assurance
Right? So you're helping people
platforms.
not
So
build trains that don't derail, basically.
yeah, well, it's like, let's get the message out. Let's evangelize, this being responsible by design and some of the responsible AI core principles around, can you explain what this algorithm is doing? Can you
Right?
be as transparent as you can about how you're using it, why you're using it, where in the spaces
Can you
that
opt
you're using
out?
it.
Why should you opt out? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, all the
Understood.
all the
Yep.
requirements that go with that, right? Like, once you go through the audit, you're supposed to actually publish the results. So if you're
The
not
results.
publishing the results, why is that?
There's no transparency,
Did
right?
your lawyer tell you not to publish it? Does that mean you failed the audit and you are exhibiting adverse impact?
That's
Or
okay. We found it, so we can fix it, right?
if you find it, you can fix it. That's
Right.
why I'm bullish
Great.
on, um, this direction that we're going, uh, because a lot of people say, well, at least human bias doesn't scale, right? Or but the problem is you don't even know where it exists. Only now that
No.
we're having this conversation are people starting to think twice about, like, oh, I wonder if
Oh.
oh well, I always interview, and I don't care about skin color, and I don't care about gender, and I don't care about these things. But you can say that, but unintentionally, you may be exhibiting certain bias. Maybe you're biased because this person went to a rival school from you,
Mhm.
right? So there's certain attributes within a profile, whether that's from a resume or from a screening or an AI powered interview
Background.
or something like
Yep.
that. There's certain things that, like, some of this information should be obfuscated, so that it doesn't trigger human bias. You don't need to see their name or where they went to school to know what they studied and the roles that they've had. But there's bias for people, just like in college, or for when you look at someone like a
Yeah,
recent college
right.
grad, you might say, "Oh, I want let's do recruiting at these Ivy League schools or these specialist
Now
schools where we know
you're
we get good engineering
inadvertently,
candidates."
yeah,
You're overlooking all of these um, potential candidates with incredible potential just because they didn't go to one of those high profile schools.
marquee schools. Yep.
And we see the same thing with companies, right? Like, where do you work now, or where did you work before? And you see bias towards the Googles, the Netflix, the Fangs of the world. Oh well,
Yep.
we know the engineering culture there. We know they'll fit in great here. I mean,
For sure.
that's
Right. Yeah, they definitely are. And the fact that they work there means that they're really good at what they do. Just
so they say.
automatically.
So they
Right.
say.
Yeah. Um, I want to unpack intersectional bias a little bit. Can you go dive a little bit deeper into what is, for the uneducated, what is intersectional bias and why does it matter? How is it different than what everybody knows as, gender and race bias?
You mean the combination of some of those? Is that what you mean? When you say
It's the
intersectionality?
the combination of, multiple known biases together doesn't necessarily signify intersectional bias. It's almost kind of like looking back. It's like looking backwards. For example, I just to offer one example. There may be bias in the system against people with extended gaps of employment. In other words, if it looks like they were not employed from 2022 to 2024 or something like that, and that adversely impacts their resume score in the algorithm ranking and they get ranked lower because of that gap. The intersectional bias here is, and I don't know exactly what would cause that, but if you were looking at that and that affects that population, there could be bias that's being undetected because, for example, you're discriminating against caregivers. If
Yep.
someone was a caregiver for 2 years, they found themselves in a position where they're the only one in the family that was able to take time off of work to be able to provide care for a family member. You may be discriminating against race or gender without even knowing it. You may be discriminating against veterans without even knowing it.
Yeah.
There might be a gap on someone's resume for 2 years because they were in the guard and were deployed, and now you're discriminating against them because of the gap, not because they're
Yep.
a veteran. But the result is you discriminated against veterans, and those are the ones that we don't really know about. To me, that's the biggest danger because we can't train the AI to distinguish things that we ourselves don't. When you look at
Yeah.
that gap in the resume, a good recruiter asks the question, what is the gap about? And the answer is deployment. And the recruiter goes, great, that's, I don't need to know, no, I don't need to ask about your discharge status or your gender or whatever. I just know that you had to serve your country. I get it. Let's ignore that gap in employment and move on. But bad recruiter looks at that and goes, this person's not qualified because they haven't been working in the last 2 years. That's, you
Yeah.
know,
Y- Yeah, no, this is it's a really, really interesting scenario. First of all, I do empathize with these people because I've had people reach out to me in that exact situation. Like, this job market is brutal, and I've been out of it for 2+ years
yeah, so
because
I'm getting kicked to the curb
my,
just
you
because of
know,
that, right? Yeah.
yeah. And then some of those other things, almost, it's not that they were not getting hired because of what was protected. They're not getting hired because of what isn't even protected and hard to. Um, I feel like some of the use cases. So I mentioned, like, this AI governance and AI assurance, platforms, and
Mhm.
there's a whole growing sort of category of software vendors that are in this space. but even some of the more advanced ones that I'm familiar with aren't necessarily diving into this unless someone explicitly signed them up to do like a special
Right.
project to look at
Right.
it, which is why,
And that's pretty obvious. If we don't know that
yeah,
we don't know, that we're not gonna tell an auditor to look for it because we don't know.
yeah.
You know,
So
you
now
don't go
you're
to an auditor
talking.
and say, "Can you please find things that I don't know anything about?" And
Well, it's one of these, like, unknown unknowns, right? Like, because if people don't raise it,
exactly,
this is part of the problem with the whole,
exactly.
bias, and holding, some of these companies accountable, um, in the first place is it takes a complaint to the EEOC to even, you know, get anyone to go and look at it, right? So in this case, I feel like it's one of these sort of special projects at this point, where someone would have to go and say, we're really curious for to
What
look at
if?
this intersectionality, and can
Mhm,
we look at all the people that we've potentially rejected because of that gap, which in itself is something we need to look at. But let's
right.
take a look at all the people that had that gap in employment, that could probably be, reasonably explained, and let's look at what other um, categories were further disadvantaging, because of that, right? Because of my social economic status, I can't afford to put them in a home. I've got to take care of them myself, or whatever the circumstances are. Because I mean, as a Gen X guy, I mean, my parents are in their 80s. I got my daughter in high school, and people are trying to care for multiple, generations. Not to mention, their own, career and livelihood. And so it's a tough, juggling act. And but some of these I feel like are still, very much under the radar. But I mean, it's an important point to bring up, and I wonder how many people are going deep enough to discern that.
I
One of
know.
the
That was what I was asking you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think is interesting is, and concerning, is that I see a lot of organizations that are underfunding, like their people analytics and
Mhm.
talent intelligence teams. So if you
Okay.
don't invest there, then you may not have the tools and the resources to even dig into some of those issues if you even if you wanted to. So that's definitely a concern. And then I'm obviously concerned if people are just writing any kind of rules into their system to automatically knock out, a resume or an application because of that gap. That's obviously,
I don't think
concern
that
number
that's
one.
intentional. Yeah. I think when that happens, it's a systemic, um, when you tell a computer to find a pattern, and it will find the pattern, and it just might not be, um, it might not be a pattern you expected, right?
Yeah,
And that may be a good discuss. I mean, that's how these machine learning and AI models are identifying new cures to diseases
yeah,
by sort of extrapolating and identifying patterns that were never visible to us before as humans. Because we're great pattern recognition experts in our own right because it helps us stay safe in the concrete jungle and in the regular jungle, but we can't absorb the kind of information that a machine can absorb, terabytes and exaflops of data. So analyzing that data, you can find these patterns that humans couldn't find or just haven't been able to.
yeah.
But that's exactly right. We might find patterns that we completely didn't expect. So I guess the point is if we train the machines to ignore those, then we're kind of asking for it at that point.
Yeah, well, I also think about the way that some of these models are trained, and I think about, um, if you put enough weight on these other characteristics, which in them unto themselves are biased. Like, let's say you put too much weight on, that they have a 4-year college degree, or they went to a
Right.
college that's listed on, U.S. News and World Report's top,
Right.
50, in liberal arts colleges, or whatever it is. Whatever is fueling that could actually have you ignoring, some of the other, valuable information, that may either, you know, boost the resume up in its, sort of match score, or there other disqualifying, attributes, within that resume. I was just looking at Glenn Cathy's post from this morning where somebody submitted and got an interview from a completely fake resume. and it was like it had a couple impressive sounding um, roles and accomplishments, but then it had a bunch of completely irrelevant and inappropriate bullet points, and it just got completely overlooked. So I don't know where they got the interview, but of course, as you can imagine, everyone's going crazy. Like, oh well, that's just a bad recruiter who didn't, read the resume thoroughly, or that's just this or that. And it's like, well, people are mass applying with these kinds of
Hmm.
resumes. Maybe not with the exact bullet points, the inappropriate bullet points that this fake resume had on it, but still, some people I think just don't understand how some resumes get through and some don't. You've got this
Right.
perfect fit
It
candidate,
could
and
also
they
not
can't.
be, it could be timing. There's a lot of things that go into it. It could be timing. It
Yeah,
could be it was on the top of the list, or it was literally the recruiter was watching their screen when it came in.
yeah,
I mean, there's so many things that it's not always just a robot doing it.
sure,
Is what I'm
sure.
trying to say.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
but I think
So
as I mean, since we're focusing on AI, I mean, it just seems like if you're gonna use it, make sure it's an appropriate use case and make sure you have the appropriate sort of
right.
controls and parameters, baked into it. I mean, that's part of um, having the technology be explainable and transparent, not to mention private and secure. But if you can't explain how it works or why this you know uh, got a B
So
minus, B
explainability. You're
plus,
talking about explainability being. I guess what you're saying is explainability is a big issue. So, um, bias aside and all the other things, if you can't explain what it's doing, you're already at a disadvantage because you can't figure out what's wrong. You can't fix it.
well, you've got to explain. So if you were a company that got where someone had filed a complaint with the EEOC, for example, in
Hmm.
the U.S., you'd have to go back and explain the decision. And so the first problem is if you let the AI essentially make a decision without human
Supervision, right?
human supervision, human in the loop, then already you've got some explaining explaining to do. And then, but even if it was, part of your decision making process, so in the audit world, we would say that's an automated employment decision tool, or an AEDT. And so if that's involved in helping you sort of down select and shrink the hiring funnel to get to who's going to really interview with the hiring team, the hiring manager, every single one of those sort of stage gates as you move through the funnel, a decision is being made, right? So this
Even if
basi-
it's a decision by a robot, right?
anything that
Yeah,
says that
it's a gate.
you
Anything like
proceed or
pass or
not,
fail, right?
yeah, proceed
Exactly.
or not, that's a decision.
That's
And
a
if you
decision.
let AI make that decision, so yeah, so technically, if a human is not um, looking at every resume, technically, it's because the algorithm um, has basically, knocked it out somehow, or it
Hmm.
fell below some threshold, and you
Threshold.
decided,
Yeah,
you made a
criteria,
human decision to
which
not.
was established by somebody. So whoever established that,
Yeah,
I guess, is
yeah,
responsible, right?
yeah. But it's also hard because you've got like the whole point of AI to help us here was to um, make
Make
us
our
more,
jobs easier.
efficient, but
Hmm.
it needs to make us more effective as well. So let's not let someone with a um, perfect, credentials, a great resume, not, they should, those are the last people that should be ghosted, right? So there's a lot of little nuances to all of these different tools and where they're used within the funnel, and how much we rely on them, to make some of these decisions as we try to find the best
And
candidates.
obviously, not
So
everybody in a position to make recommendations, make a purchasing decisions, evaluate these tools. They're not all educated in what you're talking about, and so um, it, I think that's part of your evangelism is to promote I love the or AIQ, as in AI IQ. But what I was going to ask is, how do you recommend that those of us who may not be as familiar with these complex issues that we're talking about inform ourselves about it? How do we elevate our AIQ? Where do we
it's
where
a
do we
great
do that?
setup question. Yeah, so I think first of all, the organization has a responsibility
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
to
Right, right, right. Even
everyone.
if you bought
Yeah,
this from a vendor, you can't just I mean, the vendor has some responsibility, but you can't just say, "Hey, we didn't know we bought this software." Like that. Yeah, the organization has to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously through procurement process, you want to do that that vetting, right? And then assuming the vendor's helping you with implementation, let's talk about what happens when this hits everyone's desk. Let's talk about what happens if I want to have have your software learn from my data, right? This is we've had success in hiring in the past, but now we're growing faster. So, but what can we learn from what we've done before and the decisions we've made about people before, and try to incorporate that? Well, so there's a to some degree there's a little bit of a there's data maturity and data
Mhm.
literacy that everyone should have, but in talent acquisition and talent management, there's extra sensitivity above and beyond like normal, AI literacy that you might get through, when you're onboarded and through, L&D programs and things like that. But there's an added responsibility because you're making decisions about people because there's
Impacting their careers,
legal
their
and
ability to
financial
earn
risk, but there's
money.
also,
Right.
yeah, I mean, you're judging people. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone in TA knows that to some extent, right? And so you've got to have extra sensitivity about the data and about what this decision actually means. These rows in your ATS are not just cogs in the wheel or
That's a good
potential
point. And
cogs in the
another
wheel. I
thing I
mean,
would say,
there's people.
maybe this is what you're trying to get at, is that there's even like the Fair Credit Reporting Agency, FCRA. They issued a caution about AI because it might be impacting credit worthiness, even if it's just a not just, but I mean, it's you feel like it's a candidate, and they're applying for a job. What does it have to do with credit? But still, they've issued some warnings about that because of what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's a lot of
So how do
flaws
we
in
elevate our
there.
IQ?
There's historical bias in. So part of AI literacy is not just learning how to prompt, not just write me a new job description for this rec that just got
Mhm.
approved. Write this outreach email. I just sourced 50 great candidates. I'm going to now create this outreach, sequenced outreach campaign to these candidates. Can you help me write this stuff? Well, I mean that's one use case, but you really want to understand what are all the tools that are at your disposal, and how much can I trust the output of each of these tools? Did I give it enough information? What are its sources? What data is it using? Is it using to, give me this information? So part of it is, yes, of course, I need to understand how and when to use different AI, generative AI tools, but I also need to understand how predictive AI is working behind the scenes that I don't interact directly with, which is more likely what's used to do like a match score, a stack rank of resumes and things like
Oh,
that.
okay.
Anytime you come up with a numeric
It's a
score,
predictive AI.
that's ripe for audit, and it's usually predictive AI because it's giving you a confidence level that this is what you're
Right.
looking
Sort of
for,
like the
right?
whole, here's three different shapes. What's the next shape? Like remember those tests? I don't know if the ACT or whatever.
Sure.
So you're
Yeah.
talking about that.
Right.
Like
Right.
here's a bunch of these. What would be the next one? And so that's how it's doing the scoring. And so what's the takeaway there? How do you're saying we need to be aware of the
Well, the key is it's not that you should be so savvy that you'd be able to say, well, why did this one get an 85 and this one got an
yeah, it sounds
87,
like it
and
might be a little
whatever.
hard to
It's not like that. Yeah, it's more about um, judging. Like, let's say you just based on a recruiter's bandwidth, you're only going to have time to. You're managing, 10 recs, and you've got for this one rec, you've got like 500 candidates, right? Um, I don't have time to look through 500, so I'm going to rely on this algorithm to basically show me who the top 50 are. Well, if you don't question, well, what about 51, 52? What about
Oh,
107? Like,
okay.
if I just say, here's my threshold, this is now the universe that I'm looking at, you just
I
discounted
see.
51 to 500 for no other reason than it just fell
Arbitrary
behind
score,
some
literally.
artificial.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So so that's not fair, but you also have to go against that constraint of your own, bandwidth. We're trying to hire this person by the end of the month, which means I got to back. If I back into that, I need the time to set up interviews. I need I've got to say, well, I've got to move forward, and I've got to give the hiring manager the best, crop of candidates. And so that's why I'm a huge proponent of looking past the resume and giving every reasonable candidate a shot at going beyond the resume and doing some kind of, even if it's AI conversation, just have some kind of interview where you can get a little bit more color and enhance people's applications. Because the resume should be just the starting point to discuss their candidacy, right? It's really just a marketing document. So I still think there's too much focus there. But anyway, I think that from a literacy standpoint and talent acquisition, you really need to understand, like, what is this vendor ultimately doing for me to make my life easier, to make my job, to make me more productive, but also make me more effective in my role. And based on the output that I'm getting from these tools, when do I need to question or go beyond the tools and do some legwork myself and do a little bit more digging? Because there might have been one, attribute that threw the system off. Maybe the match score was low because there was an error importing the resume, or maybe there was a typo that
Oh,
you know
gotcha.
someone
Okay.
want to overlook.
Totally
So anything
yeah,
like that.
totally unexpected, like you said, like, they just the resume didn't parse, period. It just never got absorbed by the system,
Yeah, I mean, as a
right?
candidate, you don't know. Like, you submit, it says
But you don't
you
know if
got
it
an
got through,
acknowledgement that you have no
right?
idea. You have no idea if it made it through and it got in, and someone's human eyes were
Right,
actually
you have no
looking at the other side. You have
it
no
may
idea.
have you don't even know if it went through, but if it did, you don't even know if somebody looked at it or if it just kinda it fell off of the assembly line because of some, you know, "Sorry, we couldn't scan this resume. We don't know what it is. We're just gonna assume it's no good."
Yeah, yeah, you have no
Right.
idea.
Okay.
You can test it. There might be some ways to test it, right? Give it to a resume evaluation tool and see if it tells you that something's off, or maybe you might want to use different formatting, or you might want to do this. I mean, I've had issues where, because I had so many different jobs at IBM, I wasn't even sure how to list. First of all, do I list them all? Because now we're going back to
Mm.
20th century. But also,
The
do I
20th
list? Do I
century,
actually
the
list
last
IBM
millennium.
10 times? Yeah. Do I list IBM 10 times under that, or do I have a heading that says IBM and then list the
Right.
roles? Because all these normal change, like a human reading that would read it without issue, but maybe some of the ATSs don't like the way that that's
Right.
formatted. I have no idea.
Because it
So
looks like 20 jobs, so you're a job hopper. When it's really 20 promotions
maybe,
or whatever, yeah, exactly. I see what you yeah, I'm
yeah,
not saying that that is the case, I'm just saying what if? Yeah,
yeah,
okay,
right, yeah. So so overall, I just think, you know, so literacy is part of, can I trust these systems to evaluate these candidates properly? Is it making me better at my job and more efficient at my job? Um, but then also, as you use it in your day to day, I mean, there's plenty of other processes and workflows and things that people are using either an AI assistant for, maybe, the evolution of a conversational
mhm.
AI. I give you a question or a request, you give it something back. So it's what we used to call in IBM Watson, like question answering, like just
Or
kind of back and
what we
forth
used to
like
call
that.
chatbot. Yeah,
Basically, yeah, and so a lot of that was rules based. It
right.
was
If
within
they ask
specific
this, you give them
domains, and
that, right.
yeah, or sometimes it'll say, "Oh, you have to pick one of these 5 things. Those are the 5 things I know about," right? And eventually, we move past that, and we're starting to see quite a lot of that where it's more general purpose. Um, um, can access the internet, can find you all kinds of things. Um, but there's the evolution of that, and then there's these agents, which are actually they literally have some type of agency or autonomy to go
Right,
and
so yeah, let's
execute
clarify what an agent
tasks on your
means
behalf.
is that it could what an agent means or agentic AI means that it has agency, as in it has the ability to go out and act independently or autonomously. That's what distinguishes them versus generative AI, which is it's answering a question. That's the difference. Just for the folks that are listening, they might not be familiar with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think. So you've got the predictive AI, which is basically, like you said, trying to identify, doing pattern recognition, pattern detection, and then predicting the next thing. So there's a component of that even within generative AI, right? Because you said it's predicting it's
Mm,
constantly predicting
okay.
the next word to spit out. Um, but within generative, yeah, you've got the evolution of chatbots and conversational AI, which if you're using ChatGPT or Claude,
That
things
is
like
it.
that. That's what that is. And then agents are, yeah, you're basically making a request, like, you're sending it out to go on kayak, check for the latest flight if there's a flight, if there's a reasonable flight under $500 on Thursday, and then also look for hotel. Like, so it's basically it's doing actual task
Browsing a
execution, right?
website,
So then,
doing a search, collecting
yeah,
information, measuring it, and then sort of, I don't know,
yeah.
bringing it back somehow, displaying it,
It's like
analyzing it,
really
or
advanced automation that can also go in and out of different systems. So you give it credentials, either yours, or you create a profile for
Mhm.
it as a sort of digital worker, and it can basically go out and access those systems, go from system to system. That's when, like you were talking about, agentic workflow. You've got agents actually talking to each other, and then bringing you information. So let's say you had those top 50 candidates, and all you had so far were the resumes. Well, now you need to gather a bunch of information. Maybe you're going to go out and look at their socials. What do they talk about on LinkedIn? What kind of conversations do they engage in? What's their um, do they seem to be an authority on these particular topics? Because we really need someone who could lead a team. How is their, you know, what can you decipher from the rest of their online, presence? So maybe you have, some agents going out and looking for that information, or you're internal and you're trying to gather information about, the workforce plans of different groups. If you're privy to that information, you could go out and see, and have the agents, sort of pull back all this relevant information, and now all of a sudden you've got this dashboard that agents have created for you with all this new
and only
information.
what's
And
on
you
the
didn't have to
dashboard is
go.
visible to you, and you don't know what's not there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that we've seen over the last decade, where people, you may have a team, like a data team that's getting requests all the time. Oh, can you build me a new dashboard? Can you build me a dashboard for this? It's 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 very rigid the way that's done, and in the future, actually, probably now, there's agents that can basically do a lot of that for
Oh,
you. And to your
okay.
point, Shally, like, completely customize that dashboard. So I want this type of information. I want these types of data visualizations, and then tell me based on all of that information, give me your top, sort of insights based on that. So we see AI used in that way today, both inside a company and if you're doing market research. That's one um, sort of output of using AI for market research, is it's aggregating all of this disparate information, and making sense of it, and then presenting that to you so that you can make the most informed decision that you can make. And so I think, even in talent acquisition, I think that's what we're moving towards, as people try to up their game, as people try to become more talent advisors, and take some of the rote, routine tasks, off their plate, so that they can focus more on relationships with the candidate, relationships with the hiring
Yeah,
manager,
value
understanding what the
value
needs
add.
are of the business units that you're
Right,
supporting. Yeah,
I got you.
yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah. So,
Did you? Oh,
and this is,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's evolving rapidly. I mean, I know people might be overwhelmed by just what I just described, but it's important to just continuously learn about some of
That
these
was
things.
actually
I
my
don't
next
think I'm
question.
not
Is
Yeah, I'm not expecting people to know, like, oh, well, I used ChatGPT
and
4.5 and it was better than
yeah,
Gemini 2.1 and da da da. Like, if there's plenty of people out there doing that level of experimentation, and I would just say start with just you know figuring out who's using some of the ones that are best for the tasks that you need to get done. Just pick one or two tools and try to stick with those. You don't have to experiment with all of them. Just leverage
okay,
the crowd, and just kind of gauge which are the ones that might work best for you. I mean, some of them aren't necessarily text based, right? There's a lot of AI tools in the creative spaces too, with images and
Right.
videos. So it really just depends on what your
Gotcha.
focus is. But you've got to have that learning mindset so that you're curious about how these things work, and you can distill, what can I take at face value, and what might I want to go get a second source of information about, so I can know whether I can trust this AI, because it will, like we said at the beginning, like this, it doesn't know necessarily like right from wrong. It's just gathering information, and sometimes it leaps to conclusions
Right.
based on the
That's the
information
problem.
that it
Exactly. Is
sees.
it's a robot and it's going to do exactly what you tell it to do as a robot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The reason I jumped on that when you said that is because I was going to ask you: is there a place that you go to, or recommend that people go to stay informed on some of these bigger? I know you can't learn about all of it, but is there a place or a couple places that we can go to get a gist of what's going on in this space from a layperson's kind of perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I have gone overboard in terms of like the newsletters that I follow, and the blogs that I read, and the Substack um, um, newsletters that are giving me information. So I don't have a particular like educational
Source.
site.
Mhm.
We can certainly add a couple. I don't know if you can add like some links in the show notes or whatever after this, but there's a couple newsletters of people that I trust that are. Uh, I like the way they write, and they um, help me just sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, as it
Mhm.
were. And um, so there's a couple. This guy Don Von Rossum has a great site. I think it's called Lead with AI. He's got a site. He's got a boot camp. Allie Miller, if people don't know Allie K Miller, she's got an incredible newsletter, and she talks all the time about the way her team is using AI
I've asked
constantly.
her to be on the show.
Every,
Hopefully, she'll accept.
okay, okay, cool. Yeah, she's great. There's a couple folks I know that do this AI build lab, which they have an amazing boot camp where you can learn the difference between an assistant and an agent, and build your own agent. So
Yep.
even if it's just like a using AI as a thought partner and a second brain, like we can't we forget stuff all the time. We forget the people we meet, or the maybe a summary of a webinar or something like that. And so being able to have that sort of your own personal AI sort of co-pilot is a pretty powerful solution that people could learn to build themselves. And I'm still learning a lot myself. I mean, I got to jump back in that boot camp and try to help automate my own workflows. Some of it for like sales and social media posting and outreach. Some of it for my podcast production. Right, I'm constantly going in and out of right now like 6 different tools. Some that have AI bolted on, some that are AI native. Um, and others that are more sort of just old school tech. But how do you string those all together so that I'm not constantly task switching and copying and pasting and things like that? So that's just some basic automation stuff. It's not even like full blown
Right. That's
AI,
the
but
co-pilot or
yeah,
that's the companion app that is there as an assistant to like, hey, sort this, rank this, spell check this, rewrite this, those kinds of things. Yeah, you're talking about actually helping you with automating your workflows as opposed to just sort of you know task driven stuff.
yeah. Like I'll have like I'll do if I do a prep call for with my guest, I have a note taker, an AI note taker that
Hmm.
takes notes, gives me the summaries, and then I can take that, put it into. I need to send them not a um, not a script. My show's unscripted, just like yours. It's more, here's a framework for how I think the discussion would logically, flow. Let's try to hit on a couple of these points. Let's make sure we mention, your latest book or your latest, podcast or
Right.
whatever it is that you want to, promote. And then, but then, maybe I take that and I could have something going behind the scenes. Like what else? What have they been doing over the last, month or so? Maybe there's something there that I can bring up. How to make my show notes not sound like they were AI generated completely. That's always a little tricky. So yeah, I mean, everybody has these balance points where like you want AI to help you, but you don't want it to do all the things for you. Like I want to. One of my goals is to blog a lot more. I just launched my Substack, so I'd like to get out and blog more. Well, if I'm going to do that, I'm not going to off. I'm not going to outsource that work. Not completely. I want it to help give me
Hmm.
ideas.
Right.
I want it to help refine those ideas, but and maybe put them in context, right? Maybe I want to talk about a particular. Maybe I want to talk about human-centric AI, which is what I was talking to people at Transform about. What exactly does that mean? How is it different than responsible AI? But I can say to one of my AI tools, I want to talk about human-centric
Give me some
AI.
ideas. Right.
Also, go me some ideas, but also go back into my all the transcripts which you have stored from all of my previous podcasts, and give me a couple guests that I can mention, or sound bites that I can mention and allude to in that blog post, so that I can sort of cross pollinate, podcast audience with blog audience or whatever. So there's all these different ways in which you can use it to better to make yourself more impactful and effective without actually outsourcing um, the production of. I still want it to be my words. Just like if
And
I
your voice.
write a book someday, I want it to be my. It should be my thoughts and my words, and just use the AI to help me. Just clean it up. How are we using AI to be better versions of ourselves? Is one way to think about it.
Okay. Right. To help us do what we do. Help us be us, not replace
Yeah,
us or, okay. Um,
yeah. That's the basis from what we have been calling human centric AI. So I'm working with a
got
bunch
it.
of other folks in on that area, but that's what we mean, and that's how I differentiate from responsible AI, which is the much more structured, auditable,
Ethical practices
pieces
or
of it.
right,
Yeah,
okay.
it's definitely a lot of overlap.
Right, right,
There's
right.
a
Yeah,
there's a
it
Venn
should be. It,
diagram
it
there,
should
but
all be ethical. It's not like you're like you have human centric AI is unethical. That's not how it goes, right? They both
yeah,
should
that
be
wouldn't make
ethical, but
sense.
yeah, one is more the structure of how
Right.
do you make it explainable and who's responsible and what are the ways to opt out, what are the ways that it's being audited versus the other one is more like how do we keep the human involved without causing more work for the human, which the point is to reduce work. So yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of the time here, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer the two questions that I always ask everybody on this show. And the first one of those is, who should be our next guest?
Oof. Well, if you can get Allie,
Okay,
she would be fantastic. The the guy that I had on my show, who was one of the co-leaders of this AI Build Lab, this guy named Tyler Fisk. He's just amazing. So I think he'd be a great
Tyler
guest to have. Tyler Fisk,
Fisk. All right, I'm gonna
FISK.
invite him.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah. He's awesome, and his partner in crime, Sarah Davidson, is amazing as well. So I think either of them would be great. One of the things I liked about them is it's not just their style and making sure everyone understood things as we went stage by stage in building these
Mhm.
agents. It's the community that they created, and so I just think there's a lot they could talk about in that regard as well, because I know I'm a member of a lot of communities focused on recruiting and talent acquisition as well, and I've just over the last 2 years or so, I've seen the incredible power of having a community of like-minded folks who are on this journey with you. I don't want anyone, no matter what your role is, I don't want anyone to think that they're on this journey alone. Everyone is trying to
Figure out how to, yeah,
um,
right.
get, get get comfortable with it. Where do I use it?
Hmm.
Where could I use it? But where should I use it? Is
So
a
you
better
said Tyler Fisk
question.
from AI Build Lab, that one. Okay,
Yeah,
I
build
will.
up. Yeah,
Okay,
he's great.
cool.
Yeah.
All right, and then as we close out, the last question, um, I usually ask for something that you want our audience to think deeply about over the weekend. So not a statement from you for them to consider or contemplate, but a question for them to ask themselves. So what would you ask our audience to ask themselves to think deeply about?
I would think deeply about the kind of work that you really want to do and play to your play to your strengths and figure out how AI can help you achieve that,
Okay.
right? Don't look at AI as a threat. Look at it as an opportunity
Right. So ask
to
yourself,
up
what's
your
the
own
kind of work you want to
game.
do, and how can AI get you there? Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah, because it is there. Um, I know there's a lot of doom and gloom. It's taking jobs away, but there's going to be a lot of other jobs, and we all have innate
Right.
talents and interests and transferable
Right.
skills. And so
Right.
what?
So what could you
Yeah,
be? What
I would
else
look
could you
for
be
those.
doing, and how do you prepare for that? I like that. That's really good.
Yeah, we've got to be adaptable. So I don't want people to think, oh, this is coming. This is going to take away X% of what I do. Your job may not go away. Maybe it just gets redefined, or maybe if you speak up and you're clear about what your goals are, then you can be reskilled into another role. But people are making transitions all the time, and it's normal for career paths to be nonlinear these days. It's almost an expectation. So
Hmm.
don't feel like just because you can't continue on
Right.
a
It's not.
linear
It's
path
not your
that
job title now. Yeah.
that it's the end, that
Right.
you're screwed. Yeah, no, you're not screwed at all. You've got talent, you've got skills, and there's a place for you if it's not where you thought it
Yeah.
was.
All right. So yeah, I like
It's
that. So
there
basically,
somewhere.
ask yourself, what is the kind of work you want to be doing, and how. Once you figure that out, how can AI help you get to that? So you can, switch roles, or do something different. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining me on the show today. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Thanks for having me.
absolutely. I'd love to have you back in the future again, if you're not too scarred from this one. And folks, folks, we're gonna be having, actually, funny man Joel Zeff is our guest next week, and he's an improv comedian turned consultant in the HR space, and he's going to talk about ta-da moments at work. So, kind of a departure from the typical stuff, but he was a referral from someone else that said that we should have him on the show, and I went to his website and looked him up. You can search him if you want. Joel Zeff, Zeff. Really looking forward to having a few good laughs and learning some things about how to make everyday moments more meaningful and lighthearted at work. So that's our topic for next week. Hope to see you back here. Until then, be